Having the right camera gear to start your photography journey with is very important. Not wasting your money on things you don't need that the guy at the camera store is trying to sell you while you buy your first camera is crucial. So what does a beginner photographer actually need? Well, aside from a camera, a basic lens, an SD card, and a battery, I've got 4 items here that every beginner photographer should have in their camera bag that will either level up their photography, make them quicker, improve the quality of their work, or help them become a better editor. By the way, every item in this video is under $100, and as we progress further into the video, the items get cheaper. All right, first on the list is a creative prime lens. So what does a creative prime lens need to be? A creative prime lens can be anything. All it has to do is push you creatively and then also be able to achieve unique shots. See, the thing is, when we go out to shoot, it's easy to fall into our comfort zone. Let's say, for example, you shoot with the 16-35 a lot or the 24-70 a lot, and you know that in between those focal ranges, or even just having that lens on your camera, you're covered in like 80 to 90% of situations. Now, that's a great feeling, and we should all have a comfort lens, let's say. However, we also need a lens that is going to keep us on our toes. We all need a lens that we know when we put that on the front of our camera, things get fun, things get interesting, things get weird, things get unique, things get a little bit more difficult, and that's fine. Now, the reason I suggest a prime lens here is because you can't zoom with a prime lens. You have to move around with your feet. This lens here does not zoom whatsoever. So if I want to get tighter, I have to move tighter. If I want to get wider, I've got to step back. Either way, having a lens that locks you in at a certain focal length can really push you to start to get unique compositions. Some recommendations would be the 35mm prime, the 50mm prime, the 85mm prime, or a 100 or a 135mm prime. Now, don't get me wrong, all of these lenses can be ridiculously expensive. I mean, to be honest with you, this one right here is quite pricey. However, you can pick these lenses up very, very affordably. You don't need the best optical quality. You don't need the lowest aperture, and you don't need the best weather sealing. For example, this 50mm prime here is the f1.4 version. It's great. I absolutely love this lens, right? However, it cost me about $1,200 US, so not the cheapest lens on the block. Now, I know I just mentioned at the beginning of this video, nothing on this list is over $100. Well, that is when you either buy used or you buy older gear. For example, you can pick up the 50mm f1.8 prime. By the way, this is only f1.4, but you can pick up the 50mm f1.8 prime from Canon for, I believe, either $100 or $125, depending if it's on sale, and that's brand new. Picking these up secondhand, $50 every day of the week. Having a lens that pushes you out of your creative comfort zone and allows you to capture unique shots is one of, if not the best way to level up as a photographer. So if you don't have a low aperture, somewhat creative prime lens as we speak right now, that's fine, but I would highly recommend looking at picking one up. All right, next up on the list, we have an SSD. Now, spoiler alert, this will not level you up creatively whatsoever. Having an SSD has nothing to do with how good or bad you are as a photographer, and has nothing to do with what your photos will look like. However, these are an absolute game changer for one big reason. When you shoot photos, they go onto your SD card, and then where do you put them? You plug it into your computer, and maybe you just drag and drop it onto your laptop or computer, or you put it onto an external hard drive, or if you're already one step ahead, you're probably putting them onto an SSD. So what makes one of these so special? Well, the thing is, these are fast. Really, really fast, and they're also super reliable. I want to let you know right now, if you're currently taking photos and putting them onto your computer itself, not an external storage device, I promise you, you're going to run out of storage pretty quickly, especially as you get better and as you progress as a photographer. You'll be taking more photos. Maybe you get a different camera that has a bigger megapixel sensor, which means your file sizes are larger, or you're just shooting a whole lot more often. You're going to run out of storage real soon. So you don't want to be doing that. Then we've got traditional external hard drives. Now, these were and are great. However, they are slow, much, much slower than probably the internal storage on your computer, and they're definitely much slower than external SSDs. But they're also a little bit unreliable. Internal hard drives have physical moving parts, which is not ideal if you're moving around a lot, or you have a chance of bumping or dropping or knocking your hard drive. You don't want to be doing that. This is a really quick way to, I guess, speed up the whole process of losing your photos, which is far from ideal. And that is where an SSD comes into play. There are no physical moving parts in an SSD. And that doesn't mean they're indestructible. That doesn't mean if I drop it from here and it hits the floor, that everything's going to be fine. However, they can take a little bit more of a beating than a traditional hard drive can. Like I mentioned before as well, these are also super quick to work from, which means that as soon as you plug this into your computer, it's almost like you're editing from the internal storage of your computer. It's that quick, especially if you're editing photos. Being able to edit directly from an SSD instead of a hard drive is going to speed up how quick your exports are. It's going to speed up how quick your photos load, and is also going to speed up your entire editing workflow as a whole. When I first started my photography journey, these were expensive. We're talking like 6-7 years ago. These were pricey. If you had an SSD, you were balling. However, today SSDs are far less expensive, and you can pick up a 500 gigabyte or a 1 terabyte SSD for under $100. I use about 3 or 4 different brands of SSDs. This one right here is from Samsung, and it does a great job. All right, next on the list is something that has recently decided to start living in my camera bag for good reason ever since I switched to Sony, and that is a blower. Now, these are, once again, not something that's gonna level you up creatively, but these will save your life, I guarantee you. If you're shooting on a mirrorless camera, and that means a camera without a flappy mirror in front of the sensor, you're gonna need one of these, believe me. See, when you take your lens off your camera, if it's a mirrorless camera, chances are you can look at the sensor. Now, while that looks cool, and while that's all well and good, tiny little dust spots can fall onto your sensor if you're not careful. And to be honest with you, not even if you're not careful, just if you're changing your lens in a bad environment. Let's say you're out shooting an incredible landscape and there's a lot of dust flying around, or whatever the case, maybe you're in the desert and you go to change your lens, all you need is one little grain of sand or a little bit of dust to land on your sensor as you put your new lens on, and now every single time you shoot, every photo, every video you take, you have a little black mark. Far from ideal, looks horrible. So how do you get that off? Because I promise you right now, if you try and use your finger to get that off, not a good idea. If you try to blow out of your mouth onto your sensor, that's also far from ideal. Tiny little saliva parts can hit your sensor, which is not good for it whatsoever. And you definitely cannot use your shirt, just like you may or may not use it to wipe your lens down. You're gonna need to pick yourself up a blower. All this is a rubber little dome at the bottom with a tiny little stick at the top. And when you blow like that, it just blows clean air onto your sensor. So every time, maybe not every time, but I would say every 5 to 6 or 7 times I change my lens, I quickly just turn my camera upside down. I blow the blower on it, the blower air onto my camera's sensor, and I'll know every time I change my lens that it is clean, it's good, and I'll have no sensor spots on my camera whatsoever. Now, of course, if you're shooting photo and photo only, yes, you can edit these out in post, but it's not ideal. The main killer is if you're shooting video, there's no chance of getting rid of this whatsoever. At least not right now. AI hasn't gotten that good. So do yourself a favor. You can pick these up for like $5, $10, $15, depending on where you get them from. They're also much of a muchness. They all blow the same air, so you don't really need to spend an absolute mint on one of these, but always having one of these in your camera bag means that the day that you do get a sensor spot, instead of starting your shootout and looking at that little tiny piece of dust on your sensor and going, oh dear, this is gonna be interesting. You can turn your camera upside down, have a quick little blow, and you're good to go. All right, last but not least, I sort of already touched on this when we were speaking about an SSD, but you are gonna need somewhere to edit your photos. If you're just starting out in your photography journey, you might not be editing your photos. You might even be shooting JPEG, and if you are, please change to shooting RAW, but you're gonna need somewhere to edit your photos. Now, don't get me wrong, Lightroom Classic is the stock standard. It is the greatest photo editing tool, in my opinion, on the market, but it is a monthly fee. I believe it's $10 or $15, maybe depending on where you are in the world, and sometimes that's not ideal. So how do you get around this? Well, believe it or not, you can get Lightroom Mobile on your phone for free. That's right, for free. You don't get all of the premium features and access to absolutely everything, but you can definitely get your toes wet with photo editing to find out if it is something that you want to start spending a considerable amount of money on every single month. Get Lightroom Mobile, it's free. Now, I'm a big believer that 40 to 50% of a good photo is done in the edit. I'm not saying lean on the edit and don't really worry about your camera settings, your exposure, your white balance when you're out shooting. However, what you can do inside of the edit after you've gone and shot your photo can be magical. And if you don't have a place to do that, you're missing out on 50-ish% of a good photo, which is not gonna help you out at all. If you're not leveling up your photo editing skills alongside your photography skills, as soon as you get to that point where that ball drops in your head and you go, oh, it would be really handy to be able to edit photos like an absolute beast, you're gonna need to learn Lightroom from scratch, which means you're gonna be a beginner photo editor and maybe an intermediate photographer, and it's not gonna balance very well. As soon as you start taking photos, I would strongly recommend to start leveling up your photo editing game, and I promise you, you will not regret that. And if you don't wanna spend a single cent, download Lightroom Mobile, it's free. I won't say it again, but it's free. Go download it. All right, guys, that is going to wrap up today's video. If you've enjoyed, let me know down in the comments below. If you're new around here, a subscribe would mean the absolute world, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.